Okay, so good morning, welcome to everybody into the room. Those people who are joining us remotely, those people who are joining us either on the live broadcast or at a later date, welcome to this Trust Board, Welsh Ambulance Service Trust Board in public meeting. As I always say on these occasions, for anybody looking in first time, that this is the end of the governance cycle. Most of the heavy lifting is done in our committees, and we'll hear about the work that's been undertaken in committees during the course of this meeting, either as we go along in appropriate points of the agenda or at the end of the meeting. We ask the chair of the committee to formally report back on actions that they've taken and matters they have considered. It's not our role here to replicate that work, but just to reference it. So this morning we have four apologies actually. We have apologies from Rhiannon, from Andy Swinburne, from Johnny Samet, and from Angela Matlow. We have a number of people here attending to welcome. We welcome Mishak. Mishak, it's your last outing under the Aspiring Board Members Programme, but we're warmly welcome. We thank you very much for the year that you spent with us. I hope you found it useful, Mishak.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent, good. Well, thank you very much for the time that you spent with us, and warm welcome to you. We've also welcomed David, head of our charities. Fleur from Welsh Government, Fleur Jones, will be joining us at some point during the course of the meeting, and we have a specific agenda item to do with her work on the structured assessments. We also have two people joining us for patient experience. We'll introduce them at the appropriate time. And we also have Anthony Evans and Rachel Williams giving us assistance with British Sign Language. I think that covers everybody who's welcome. And I apologize, of course, for warm welcome to Leanne. Nice to see you standing in for Johnny. Great to see you, Leanne. Welcome. Good, thank you very much. So I think that's everything we need to do by way of welcomes. The next item is, as usual, an item of sadness in that we have to report, and I would like to spend just a few moments reflecting on one of our very long-serving DOMs who very sadly died recently, and that's Dermot O'Leary, who spent over 20 years, I think he joined us in 2001, and a long and illustrious career before that as well, in the service of the country and ambulance services. I'm going to ask Lee just to say a few words about Dermot O'Leary before we proceed further.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you say, Dermot O'Leary sadly passed away after a short illness earlier this month, leaving his wife and two children. He did join us in 2001, had a very successful career in the ambulance service, and alongside that served 26 years in the Territorial Army, Welsh Fusiliers, so a serviceman through and through. In and outside of work, Dermot was very passionate about improving road safety, and it was in that regard that we received some very kind words from Amanda Blakeman, the Chief Constable of North Wales Police. Dermot's funeral actually takes place today, and as you said, there's an apology from Andy Swinburne. He's our representative of the board today at that funeral, and so I'm sure that the board will join me in sending our collective condolences to Dermot's family, his friends, and of course his many colleagues.
Thank you, Lee. We'll just pause for a moment just to pay our respects, particularly that the funeral is today. And it's good to hear that one of our colleagues is representing us there. So just a few moments to think about and to reflect on a long career for Dermot O'Leary. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Lee, for those words. So let's move on through the agenda. Item 2, in terms of declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything to declare related to this meeting? No. And item 3 is approval of the previous minutes, the minutes of the 22nd of November. Asked to approve those. Everybody consent to approve those minutes? Oh, that's good. Item 4 is the action logs, and unusually there are no open actions on the log today. So unless anybody has something to say about it, that's a swift item. Good. Okay. Item 5 is the chair and the vice chair's report. I'm going to take the paper as read. My activities and the activities of our vice chair are well recorded. I don't know whether you wish to say anything specific. I've got nothing more to say other than take the part as read, and I will take questions in a moment. But Kerry, did you want to add anything specific?
Just one small point. So, of course, we couldn't do visits for a period of time because of the level of flu. But in the last couple of months, I visited Cardiff PD twice, and Rhiannon and I were at Morriston earlier this week. And the reason I wanted to mention it is because my first visit to Cardiff ED, there were no ambulances waiting outside. Now, we've all can see in the papers today how the handover delays are fluctuating and how there's been some difficult times more recently. But I just wanted to draw attention to the really positive feedback from staff on the number of calls that they're now doing as a result of the reduction in handover delays.
Calls per shift.
Yes. Yeah. So it's been positive. At Morriston earlier this week, there were several crews, but actually in the time we were there, that was resolved. But obviously it's a snapshot in time, and our exec colleagues are much more in the detail. I'm sure we're going to come back to that today, but I thought it's positive to hear from staff the impact on them.
Good. So any questions to either to me or to Kerry from our... Good. Okay. So much. That's good. Good. Okay. In that case, we move on to item number 6, which is the Chief Exec's report. So over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much. And I'll take the report as read as ever, but I'm going to just highlight a few things. So I continue to try to balance a bit of internal visibility, but alongside a lot of external work. So I've seen very much my role in the last few months is about building those partnerships across the health system. So it was a really busy December, actually, you probably could see in terms of the activity update. But a couple of things that I want to just raise in this area. I had a great morning in Bexley and a fantastic morning as well in Swansea, where the executive teams walked me through their pathways, whether you were walking in as an ED patient or whether you were brought in from an ambulatory perspective or referred to as a GP. So I got a real sense in both hospitals about the pressures that they're under, but also a real sense of a joint acceptance that we all need to do more, and a real sense that they really are trying. So this I think what was really useful about both those visits is understanding what they're trying to do, accepting that some of these things are going to take time. So particularly in Swansea, they've got lots of different areas where you're assessed depending on whether you've come in with a frailty issue or a medical issue or a surgical issue, but a real sense of actually we want to try to combine some of these assessment units so we can improve flow and maximise the use of our staff. So I think the reason for sort of starting with that is there's a real sense for me that these are health boards that haven't given up and that continue to look for innovative ways, but equally have high amounts of demand. It's not the first time I've walked through EDs and seen corridor care. You'll know that I come from an acute health background, but there were some times during those visits where that was, it felt quite a bit of more. We talk about moral injury, don't we, for staff? So you can absolutely see these health boards are doing the best they can in difficult circumstances. So that view about the pressure on the NHS is felt by all of us. So making sure that we can be really good partners, hold up the mirror, pressurise, try to encourage, but also accept that this is not a perfect world, I think is something that's really important, and particularly for me and my leadership with my system colleagues. We also had Jacqueline Totterdale come and visit a couple of days before Christmas. That was a great visit. She absolutely had a fantastic time. She talked really passionately when the executives met her after her visit about the people that she met in the control rooms and the teams that took her around and how passionate they are about their work and all the innovation she could see across VPH. So that was a fantastic visit and really enlightening for her. Myself and Lee, we also had some time in London early January where we had some briefings around the learning that ambulance trusts have had from recent critical incidents and events in England. So that was a really useful moment for us to connect around the learning in terms of what you do when there's a major incident, but also to connect with our colleagues again around what are you doing, what's different, what's happening. So I always think those are fantastic networking events for us as well. One of the things that we have managed to secure from that meeting with AACE is I have asked formally for AACE to provide all chief executives with a summary of what they have done in response for the Manchester Arena inquiry report. So we know that nobody has had specific funding, but we equally know that in England they have done some things because they had a pot of money that was badged for a number of things, of which they could utilise some of that funding to help them with the recommendations for the Manchester Arena inquiry response. So I've now formally asked AAs to capture that so that we as chief executives could have a view across our sector as to who's doing what, has done what. And I think that'll be really useful for us in our later board discussions in the forthcoming few weeks around what are some of the decisions we want to make around that particular piece of work. Moving on to the ambulance performance framework then. So of course, we also had phase 2 go live. And I want to absolutely thank all of the executives because they've worked really hard to negotiate the new ambulance performance framework with Welsh Government and then to implement it. And it has been a sizable change for our organisation and sizable as well for our team. So a huge thank you to each executive and every colleague. Specifically want to thank Lee because obviously when it actually started on the 2nd of December, he was there having to make sure it landed well. And I think the report also describes some of the agile learning that we did. So when something wasn't right, we just flexed, we moved, we did the right things for patient safety and for our staff. We also made the move at a time where we had a massive peak in demand, which we hadn't foreseen. And I don't think anybody quite in NHS Wales can quite work out what this sudden peak was at the start of December, but there was one and we all felt it. So, you know, all credit to the teams for managing a change process at the same time as a peak in demand. We've talked a little bit about the hospital handover delays and the winter sprints aimed to try to ensure that that 45-minute handover was going to be met. And there were some improvements during that sprint fortnight. There were more improvements you can see from the paper around things like NEPs and discharge. The outcome of the sprint 2 weeks from a chief executive perspective will be discussed at a future NHS Wales leadership board meeting where we can all have a view as to, you know, what we might want to do differently. They are doing another sprint at the moment, but we've had, I think, less communication about that sprint than we had in the early December one. Sticking with the handover then, we had a NHS leadership board early in December where we had escalated and highlighted to NHS Wales that we were concerned that the gains that we had received in October around hospital handovers had seemed to have slipped. And we were very worried, particularly at the start of December month, where we had this big peak and surge of activity, that actually having that slip could be incredibly problematic. So we worked really well as a team, and thanks to Andy, Lee, Liam and Leanne, because we produced some really good data sets around particularly harm. And I went and presented that into the NHS leadership board to the chief executives, talked about the demand, talked about the number of patients that are waiting. And we have a story later on about a long patient wait. And there was a real sense of, okay, we've got to try to pull this back. So whilst the commitment remains that we will have the handover 45 released to respond at the end of January, I haven't had a date. So it's the end of January in 2 days' time. But what we did determine in early December was that the health boards would at least try to pull back their handover position to the gains that we had in October, with a view then to the 45-minute release to respond in January. NHS Wales has rewritten to our health board colleagues to confirm that they are still expecting the release to respond to go live at the end of January. And we continue to apply pressure around what's the date, because we need to prepare our crews. You know, what are the things we need to enact in terms of a sort of a day-to-day operational perspective, and we're waiting for that information. So even though our handover position was poorer in the month of December than, say, October, it was has still been better than across the year. So Rachel's team did a great piece of work about was the unavailability of ambulances at any point in time. And over the year, the average has been 20%. So 20% of our resources are unavailable. In December, it was 15%. Not ideal, but you can see there's a shift. So I'll pause with the winter sprints. The only other couple of things then is you'll see that we had the confirmation from Jacqueline that we're still in tiering status level 1, which was great news for the organisation. And I think a real testimony to the work that the board collectively does. You'll also have noticed in her letter that she did talk about a review that NHSP and I were doing around things like harm and quality indicators, which we will get a report at some point in time. We're not entirely sure when, but you'll also see that the Healthcare Inspectorate Wales is also doing a desktop exercise. So I absolutely see the themes of quality, the care that we give our patients, how we're managing complaints, concerns. It seems to be a cross-cutting theme for a number of our bodies that I'll say regulators, but I know that's a soft R here in Wales. But I think that we just should be prepared that we'll be getting some feedback around those themes in the next few months. And I think I finally want to end with our staff survey. So we have put in our staff survey rate here of 43.1%. And whilst members of the public might think that's not even half of your staff, it's a massive improvement for us as a trust. And, one has to add in a little gloat. We were the best provider in Wales. So actually, I'm really delighted with that. We won't get the results, I think, till February or March. Is that right, Carl? Angie, February, which always feels like a terrible lag, doesn't it? People fill it in October, we get the results in February, and we probably get to tell them in March, and then we ask them a few months later to start all over again. But I thought it was a really good sign. So thank you for everybody that encouraged their colleagues to do the staff survey. And I think I'll end there, if that's okay.
No, thank you very much. And just on that point, Carl, what percentage was it last year? I think it was 20.
No, it was 36 last year. Year before was 24.
That's really confirmed. More or less doubled the response rate in 2 years, which really is remarkable.
About 83% or something like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't want that to go unnoticed because it is remarkable. And in the health sector, I mean, again, sort of the 20th is kind of what you get, isn't it, normally for health trust?
Yeah, so engagement, especially in NHS Wales.
Yeah. So for us to do 40+% response rate is really good. Any questions to Emma? Thanks, please. Yes, go on then. To get ahead first. So I didn't see you first, so go on then.
I had a question about the 45-minute handover. I visited Morriston about a couple of weeks ago, and there was some sense from some of the teams that even though the handovers were improving, there was a sense of guilt that they were passing the patient on and leaving them without that care being continued. And it was really just a question about how we sort of managing that and educating the staff in WAST to sort of deal with that.
Yeah. I'll get Lee to help me with this one, but one of the things that we certainly started with when we started around the release to respond, and the WAST has been looking at the release to respond protocol for a lot longer than just this year, because of course it originates in places like London, where they manage obviously this sense of you're handing over and then you're leaving. And one of the things we've been really clear around in terms of what that release to respond protocol will be about where are the points of escalation for staff that have those sorts of concerns, and equally making sure we're not in a situation where we have a paramedic or an EMT with a nurse having an argument about where's the patient going and does the patient get left, does the person stay on the back of the cab? So we absolutely have been really aware as we've been planning ourselves for the release to respond around how are we going to prepare staff, how are we going to talk to them about what they do when they're worried about the safety of a patient. And we've been really live to that in the Handover 45 Task and Finish group, which Liam is on, around actually making sure that the responsibility, particularly for people that are worried also about risk, is actually managed further up the line. So I don't know whether Lee or Liam wants to add to that.
I'll add something. Is my cog's returning as you shared the feedback, because I think what I would say is our dialogue with our staff in relation to the 45-minute position has been somewhat controlled until we get to a point at which it is a 45-minute handover, and we've developed that mechanism of the handover occurring and the crew responding to the next patient who's waiting in the community. Largely, whilst we've been doing what we've been doing to try and improve and mitigate the consequences of handover delays, largely the improvements that we saw through summer, and we should hold out Morriston as a turnaround site, have been as a consequence of the actions being taken by the site and at the site. So there has been no forcing of handover. The handover is occurring, still occurring on the terms of the health board. And so as we begin to get to a position where we see the 45-minute position held out, the handover must occur at 45 minutes. We'll, of course, have processes and mechanisms that support that, and our dialogue with our staff needs to change. And I think that's what Emma's already alluding to in terms of when that date arrives, we will engage with our staff on that premise. Our position, of course, will be a growing of confidence that our priority clearly needs to be to patients that are pre-hospital and waiting in the community. And what I hope, and we already had a mention, staff getting to more patients in a shift, that's the positive effects that I think we need to be talking to our staff about. Patients pre-hospital, undifferentiated, who are in desperate need of an ambulance to get to them. Hopefully that is what builds and creates the confidence and the sense of reward for our people.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Liam, I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add from the meetings with your
So I think just from an inpatient perspective on the emergency department, it's the same measure as we're just describing in terms of us getting out to the community and wanting to respond. The equivalent measure is if we're able to hand the patients over to the right specialties earlier, then those specialties are better placed to get better outcome for the patients they're caring for. So we know from particularly Cardiff, they did a huge amount of work around right bed first sight. And so while it increased the level of risk that they were taking with boarding and other measures, they were in a stronger position to manage that because actually they were holding specialties together. And that meant that then those specialty consultants felt more confident we were going to get to the stroke or the heart attack or the fractured neck or femur in a timely way for them to do the best that they could for their patients. So I think the real shift that we've seen over the last couple of years, and particularly as we move towards this handover 45 approach, is a genuine understanding of the system risk. It isn't a WAST risk, and it isn't a ward risk or a department risk. Actually, it's much, much more understood that this is a system risk, of which handover is a key kind of red flag. But actually, the big problem and the big issue that health boards have is at the back door.
Yeah.
So it's fully understood and being worked through.
Thank you. Thanks, Eddie. Good.
Yeah, just 2 points. One, I just wanted to say, I know I emailed you Emma, but I just really like the structure of your report.
Thank you.
And I particularly welcome the strategic context and insights and updates around that. So I just wanted to make that point. And then my question was just around the HIW review. And I just wondered, is that going to come to Quest? Because I'm assuming there'll be some lessons in there, some insights, different lens. So from a governance perspective, I just wonder how that's going to land.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll get both Trish and Liam to help here. So just for sort of greater clarity, HIW have asked us to supply them with a significant amount of information, of which some will obviously they'll have access to from the public domain, and some is quite similar to the PAM submission that we were looking at as well. So Liam's team has been pulling that together, and that's due to go to them on the 1st. The deadline's the 1st. I'm not entirely sure, Liam, how long they're going to do their desktop exercise. I don't think it's been particularly clear around how long they're going to take. We have asked questions like, are you going to interview people? Because actually I always have a slight fear that you just land data and information cold, then where's the nuances, where's the conversation, where's the opportunity for us to talk about the governance that Quest holds, etc. So I think that's still a little bit unknown, but the absolute outcome will naturally formally come to us. And yes, I imagine we would take it to Quest in the first instance. Lynn, have you got any comment about what we think the structure of the review is going to look like, in addition to what I've said? I think it's a little bit murky or cloudy.
So we have got at the next Quest meeting, we have got the new regime going forward to Quest members. So there's a suite of papers that talk about how they've changed their review model, how they're looking across the organisation. So previously, the relationship was between the medical and the nursing directorate as a primary point of contact between HRW and an NHS organisation. They've extended that, so they've got more contact points with the chief. They've got contact points being built in with the chief operating officers. I think they've also got contact points being built in through the year with the people's officers. So they've extended their relationship into the organisation on an ongoing basis, and those papers set out how they envisage this new process working. This is our first experience of the new process, and it may be that this is their first experience, certainly with the trust, if not ours. So we have been liaising with our kind of relationship manager. We're in good form, good communication. My team is doing the collation of all of the required information. And as part of the submission, we will, of course, make ourselves available should they want to ask any questions on anything for context or clarification.
Thank you. Good. Any other questions, comments to Emma? Two things I would just like to sort of underline. I think you've already mentioned escalation status, but I mean, it is commendable that we are one of the few organisations within the system in Wales that are at the lowest level of escalation, and long may that continue. Well done to everybody on that. And the other thing, had Andy been here, I would have asked him perhaps to say a few words about the slight change in the nomenclature for the College of Paramedicine, which is now the Royal College of Paramedics.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth clearly reflecting for any member of the public or others who are interested that the professionalisation of what an ambulance service does and the drive to be a clinically led organisation, I think it just reflects that journey, which is a very significant change from an ambulance service of 21st century, an ambulance service of today, which is an entirely different beast.
And Chair, just for awareness, I did write to the Royal College of Paramedics to congratulate them at the start of the year on behalf of the board, because I think it's well earned, and it's, as you say, it's in terms of status.
Yes, indeed. Good. Okay, so if everybody's content, we'll move on. We move on to item number 7, which is questions from the public, and I believe, Estelle, we have a question.
We do have a question, Chair. Thank you. And good morning, everybody, if you're watching online. This put my colleagues on their mettle this morning, because as of 9:15, we didn't have a question, and then all of a sudden we did. And it's from Isaac Bennett. So if you're watching, Isaac, thank you very much for the question. And that question I'm going to direct initially to Carl. You may want to hand to Lee. And the question is, what steps are currently being taken to improve staff retention and well-being in the ambulance service? And how will these measures help to improve patient care and ambulance response times? So I'll hand over to Carl, if I may.
Thanks very much, Estelle, and morning all, and thank you very much, Isaac, for your question. So the Welsh Ambulance Service is actively improving staff retention and wellbeing through several targeted initiatives. These include adopting proactive approaches to reduce staff absences, such as early intervention and support programmes that include progressing actions outlined in our health and wellbeing plan. Additionally, we are conducting exit interviews to understand why staff leave and inform our improvements, holding regular one-to-one meetings to support individual needs, listening and acting on staff feedback from the annual staff survey, and we are also investing in leadership development to ensure our colleagues are supported and well led. Collectively, these measures foster a more supportive work environment, helping staff feel valued and cared for. By looking after our people, this in turn is expected to enhance patient care by ensuring a more engaged, healthier and stable workforce. Lee, I don't know if you'd like to come in at that point.
Thanks, Carl. It's an interesting question, and I think for me, I would start by reflecting on whether we, as an organisation, would consider ourselves to have a retention issue. Now, of course, we monitor retention very frequently. It's included in our MIQPR data that we see at the board, and of course, we know as we move through the COVID pandemic, we saw some uplift in retention. Some uplift in turnover. Predominantly, I think, likely due to people toward the end of their careers, perhaps reassessing their priorities after that experience, but we've seen that return to pre-pandemic levels. I think what I would say is that we have mixed data beneath that when you look at particular parts of our organisation. So our frontline EMS service, emergency medical service, I think has a very stable position. I don't think we're concerned about turnover in that part of our organisation. But there are some other areas, aren't there, Carl, where we know it's slightly higher than we would want. And of course, what that means for us is the continual need to invest in recruitment, the continual need to invest in the training. And of course, it's always going to be better for us to try and keep our staff healthy, well, and with us, because otherwise we lose the experience that they're gaining. And of course, we want the best experience to make the best decisions in the interests of patients. I think mentioning the health and wellbeing plan is absolutely right. There is many actions underway across the trust to try and keep our staff as well as possible, but recognising, as we do, that they are operating in a stressed system with potential exposure to issues that may cause moral injury. So I think the fact that we're alert to that, understand that, and are wanting to invest in our people to do best for patients, for me, I think it's quite palpable in our organisation. So that's all I would add, I think. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Lee. And I think you've reminded me as well that we're doing some work on a wider NHS Wales basis in terms of health inequalities across Wales, so mapping actually our absence levels with some of the most deprived areas and making sure that we can provide bespoke interventions to those communities. So I think there is that joined up system approach as well. Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much, Nicola. Thanks, Lee and Estelle. And that was the question.
It was the question. And just to say to anybody watching, we always welcome questions as a board. Next board meeting will be at the back end of March. So please have a look at our website or social media for those dates, and please feel free to submit your questions.
You're welcome very warmly. Okay, we move on then. So thanks for that question. Thanks for the answers. Item number 8 is patient experience. So we're going to be joined by 2 colleagues, I think, James Goff and also Ben Scott. This has just left the room, so I assume she's probably gone to get them. So she was looking ahead, which is great. This is a case looking particularly at an elderly lady, a 92-year-old who suffered an extended wait of some 16 hours after a fall. And well, welcome to you too. Who is who? Who is Ben and who is James?
I am Ben Scott, for clinical lead for performance.
Very warm welcome.
Thank you.
And obviously a warm welcome to your colleague.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So I've introduced the item on the basis that this is patient experience of a 92-year-old who suffered an extended wait as a result of a fall from a chair, which has been a little bit about. I don't know whether Liam wants to do a brief introduction further than that.
Yeah, I guess just to set the scene for the board and what we've brought to you today. So the experience in some part I regret as much as unusual. It is an experience that I think we will all recognise. It makes the experience no less distressing for the family involved. What we wanted to do is bring and share with you what it feels like, what it felt like for Mrs. Moss and for Mrs. Parfit. And then with James and Ben, really just talk through some of the stuff we've done over the winter. So not just bringing the story and reiterating where we are not able to offer the service that we would want to, but actually how we've been working with our partners and how we've been working across the organisation to do something differently and try and do our best to support more patients over the winter in their own homes, as well as obviously then for those that need to go into hospital. And I'll touch on a little bit around into our team subsequently.
Wonderful. Good. Thanks very much. So real warm welcome to you, and thanks for giving us your time. These are really important items for us on our agenda. So we really give you a very warm welcome, and we're very keen to hear from you. So over to you.
I'm screen sharing a video first, Chair. Give me a second, thank you. My name is Judith Parfit, and I'm a daughter of Ethel Moss, who was the patient that was struggling when we had to call the ambulance. On this particular day, she rang me and said she was in dreadful pain, But by the time I got to the house, she told me that I didn't see it, but she told me that she had stumbled backwards, knocked into a chair, and she couldn't move, so she was trapped. I could see that there was inflammation on her leg. I tried to get it up to see, I know I shouldn't have maybe, but she was, no, I don't want to move. So I had to phone the ambulance service, and they told me that there's going to be quite a delay because I make her comfortable, which I tried to do. And she's 93, so it was really upsetting to see her so upset. She was in terrific pain, and I did ask the lady at the time, could I give her any painkillers or anything? She said, no, you're not supposed to give her anything at the moment in case there's a break and she need an op, which I understood. And I was told that the wait would be approximately 19 hours. And I asked at that time, could anybody come out just to have a little look to see if there was anything I could do, or, or if I could give her any painkillers. I wasn't offered, which I found out since, that a medical team could ring and give some advice, but I wasn't told that at the time. And then she needed the toilet. So that was really distressing for her and for me, because obviously I never go to the toilet with her. And she had to try and lift her bum cheek so that I could slide an adult nappy, whatever they're called, incontinence pad, and then sort of pull it out from underneath her. And to say that we were both, well, mortified at that was terrible. It was a shocking thing to see Mum going through. She was crying, I was crying, and the pain as well, because every time she moved, I just felt that it was so undignified for her, having to let her daughter do things like that for her when she's very, very independent, and the pain that she was in. I just wanted to give her some painkillers, and I didn't know if I could or I couldn't. But not knowing, oh God, it's very traumatic to be sitting there with somebody that you can't help. You're up and down, you're looking at the window, you're going back and forth to the door. You don't, and then my mum would say, can you ring them again? And it was I said, Mum, I've rang them half an hour ago. I can't ring them again. And the thing was, when the paramedic came, they were so good. I can't speak enough highly of them, because when they came, the first thing he said when he came, he looked at her leg and he said, I think she's broken her femur. So they brought the stretcher in there, did the seat thing, and they put it on that, and they took her. I wasn't allowed to go with her at that point, but I could have followed her down in the car. I was told she was in the Grange then, and that she was in the assessment unit, and that she had broken her femur, and that she'd be going down for an op. When she had painkillers, I think everything was hunky-dory for her, but and she recovers quite quickly. So she's very resilient in that way. She just gets on with things. She's very stoic, and to see her like that, it was distressing. After the experience, I felt that I needed to make the ambulance service aware of how I was feeling, and my mum, and the discomfort and the upset, the trauma, and the loss of dignity. And I needed to know why that it had taken 19 hours for an ambulance to come. And eventually, when I had the reply back, I didn't find it very satisfactory. When I read it, I thought, well, yes, you're saying you followed the procedure, but that doesn't help me or my mum, and it doesn't help other people that are obviously going to go through it again unless something changes. Unless you go through it yourself, I think it's very hard to appreciate your feelings. And it's just, I felt as if I was just, oh, well, we've answered, and it's swept away. What was the point of that? And that's what I felt like. I couldn't even be bothered, because my mum kept asking me then, have you had a reply from the ambulance? And I was like, yeah, but you wouldn't want to read it, Mum, because it's just ticking boxes, really. So what is the point?
want to add anything to that or go to a discussion?
So that would be great. I've got a couple of slides to share, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Good.
So firstly, thank you for the opportunity for inviting us. Great to be here. Hello all. I'm James, Head of Service for Integrated Care. So I'm operationally responsible for 111 service and the CSD, so that's the Clinical Support Desk, amalgamating into the remote service very shortly. So I'm just going to talk to you about the Falls Desk concept. I'm, it's great that I'm sitting here, but there's a whole team behind this. Lots of people, but lots of effort into this work. I just wanted to reflect on the story that we've just heard. Obviously, that's not the experience that any of us, and I'm a clinician by background, it's not the experience that anybody would wish to give. But I fully recognise the impact of falls on patients' dignity, and particularly when we do get things wrong, and sometimes we do, that can have significant consequences for the individual. But I'm going to talk to you today about some of the improvement that we've been making to falls, and in particular the way that we respond to falls. And then Ben is going to talk through some of the other outcomes, probably more wider than the Falls Desk concept. So the Falls Desk was funded by Welsh Government and has been funded by Welsh Government. And we've had investment to test a different way of working. So this desk operates 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock in the night. And we have some lovely people working on the desk, some of which are on the screen in front of you. And you can see we've got a paramedic. So that's a Falls Desk paramedic, clinician or nurse. And then we've got a Falls Desk response coordinator. So the Falls Desk clinician, the paramedic or nurse, will actively work on our stack. So that's the calls that are waiting on the 999 response queue. And that clinician will be focused to providing the right advice very early on, very early in the patient's journey, so that we can talk about things like hydration, nutrition, movement, all the things that we know make an absolute difference to the final outcome for the patient. So the Falls Desk clinician follows a very structured, but quite structured question set. And the question set allows us to really hone in on, are you able to get up off the floor? Are we able to support you up off the floor? Are we able to give you something to eat or drink? And I'll go on to talk a little bit further about that, a little bit more about that in a second. The response coordinator, so you've got Carl on the screen, there are a few others. The response coordinator is a person that manages the falls resources across the whole of Wales. So previously, we managed these on individual desks. We're now taking ownership of all of the resources on the Falls Desk, and we're making very quick, rapid, efficient, and effective decisions about sending the most appropriate resource. That could be a falls assistant, it could be a volunteer, or it could be some of our partners, for example, the fire and rescue service in some of our local areas. The allocator, the response coordinator, has sight of other resources, so that includes ambulances, but we will link with the local area to make sure that we get the right response to the patient. So I talked a little bit about the focus on providing early advice, nutrition, hydration, and movement. I wanted to reflect on the video that we've just heard. Traditionally, our advice as an ambulance service has been focused on, please don't eat anything, don't drink anything, and stay as still as you possibly can. And that is the correct advice for a very small number of patients, extremely small number of patients. What we've started to recognise over the last few years in particular is the longer that someone stays on the floor, the worse their outcomes can be. So now this very early clinical involvement joined up with a response means that targeted advice will obviously improve outcomes. And then support for patients to lift from the floor. We've been very successful in identifying a small number of patients that can be lifted and supported remotely with a little bit of advice, a little bit of clinical input. Those patients can be safely lifted. I'll talk to that on the other slide. Thank you, Alex. So here's just a bit of early data, and it is very early data because we've only been going since November, but I thought it's really important to bring that to the board today. So 1,465 incidents managed by the desk in November and December 25. Out of those incidents, so the 1,465 incidents, 1,197 patients were provided with direct clinical advice. So the direct clinical advice on 81% of the occasions that we've given advice was provided within 2 hours. And that's really impressive, because what that means is for the patient that is waiting very much on the floor, sometimes, maybe off the floor, but in our instance, we're dealing with patients who are still on the floor. They are having targeted clinical specialist advice within 2 hours for the majority of the time. And then I think this is remarkable. 18% of the patients, and that's a huge number of 266 in just 2 months, have been lifted from the floor following that specialist remote clinical advice. Now, this could be working with relatives, it could be working with bystanders, but it could also be working with people such as, in care homes where we have carers. But it's about providing the confidence, the clinical confidence, and also undertaking an assessment to determine that it's safe to really focus on getting the patient up off the floor. Huge credit to the team there. And 83% of that, of those patients has been achieved lifted up from the floor within 2 hours. The falls responders, so these are our commissioned falls responders, but also our community first responders, our volunteers, where we've deemed it suitable for them to attend. On 64% of the occasions we've got there, we've sent something, we've got the patient up off the floor within a 2-hour period. And again, it's our ambition to increase that, to make that higher. But at the moment, this is really early days and the team are still, embedding into the processes. 233 clinical consultations were as a result of deterioration of concern. Patients who are waiting for an ambulance because they've had this early clinical intervention, we've recognised that something within their presentation has deteriorated. Traditionally, only back a few months ago, some of those patients may not have had access very early on to some of this specialist clinical advice. Thank you, Alex. I'll hand to Ben.
Thank you, James. So a snapshot of 2025 in terms of falls. Now, it probably comes as no surprise for those that are aware of falls rates. 13% of our call volume is falls related. It's the single largest cohort of call type. And that has been consistent year on year. So it's not a new phenomenon. This is the percentage of calls that we deal with every year. What's really interesting is there has actually been an increase in the amount of calls we've had in the latter half of 2025, rising 21%, which is a good 400 odd calls increase in terms of falls between June and December. And I think what's interesting is that also demonstrates that we're meeting the demand. So whilst there has been an increase of demand, our ability to respond has also increased to keep step with that. So we're still able to respond to those calls. When we break it down by resource type, and James has eloquently talked about the different resources that we provide, if we break it down specifically to the commission services that we provide and commission, we're looking at 10,000 calls specifically to falls responded to by these resources. So that's our contracted falls responders in 2025. So considerable proportion of the calls that are responded are provided by our commission services. Again, looking at utilisation, so how effectively are we using those resources, which I think is very significant for us all in this times of financial difficulty and awareness that sort of geography and topography of finances is difficult. We're seeing an uptick. So we're seeing an increase in our utilisation of those resources. So we're commissioning those resources and we're seeing that we're using them more throughout the year. So actually we've seen an increase from July of 52%. And December, we're at 62.3%. So a significant increase in the amount of utilisation of those resources. I think what's really interesting when we look at, and this is specifically to mirror the times that the falls desk is open, so looking at the hours of 7 till 7. I think what's significant when we look across 2025 and we look at response time to those call types, we have a target of 2 hours or less, and we achieved that for 64% of the time for 2025. Now, what's interesting is you and I are probably aware there was some increased pressure, so system pressure that came in at the end of this year, so November, December, in 2025. So winter, November, we actually saw an increase in terms of system pressure. And that's reflected in our ability to respond. So actually, we saw a downturn in our ability to respond within 2 hours at 58%. But what's really, really interesting and reassuring in terms of the steps we're taking to both utilise those resources and grow our falls responder resources through the use of volunteers as well as our commission services, we can actually see a sustained response within 2 hours when we utilise those resources. So where they're available and the call is suitable for them, we're able to respond within 2 hours, 67% of the time, to actually able to sustain that really high target of response time. Whereas usual response, we're looking at about 58%, because obviously that's affected by all the other system pressures around potentially release at ED, etc. And that is it from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Really interesting. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I've actually got some, but let's go around the table. Do you want to go first?
Please, thank you. So I think the first thing is to apologise, isn't it, to Judith and Ethel for, a pretty poor service. I appreciate all the hard work that everybody in NHS Wales does, particularly around frailty. But for you to have the experience that Judith and Ethel had is incomprehensible. So I do apologise for that. And it's great to see the work that we're doing. And I reflected earlier on, Chair, about going through some of the EDs and they're, creating good frailty units, because actually our frail elderly community is a demographic I think we collectively need to have some responsibility for. So I want to thank the Falls Desk. It's definitely been highlighted in meetings that I've been to as being a good initiative. So thank you very much. I was grateful to hear both of you talk about Falls being our top disposition, because when I look at performance reports, Falls across whether it's summer, spring, autumn is the top verified incident. So I'm quite passionate about we need to get this right for our patients. We talk a lot about ROSC, we talk a lot about chest breathing, stroke, but actually the focus on Falls for me feels like it's a bit of an imperative. So I just wanted to advise the board that I reached out last year to Public Health Wales and the NHS Wales chief nurse to say, can we have some kind of Falls review? Because my sense is there's great variation across Wales. We've described some of our partners that really truly help us, but fire and rescue help us in some regions and not others. So it's very much a sort of a varied response for our communities. And I think we should be getting our communities to have a single good all Wales response for that. And I think we can play a role as a national provider around highlighting to our partners where something works well and where maybe things could be improved upon. So I'm looking very much forward to us working collaboratively. I think it is a public health issue, and trying to see whether or not going forward we can manage this demand collectively differently. I also note from meetings I was in yesterday that we're going to rewrite our volunteer strategy. So I'm absolutely hoping that Falls becomes a massive part of our volunteer strategy as well. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I will definitely be in touch with both of you too when we start to kick off some of the work nationally on Falls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. And I mean, your reference to a population group, it's a population group which can only but grow.
Absolutely.
As we become a more and more an ageing population.
Yeah.
So rather than look further and try and remember the sequence of hands going up, can we just kind of go round the table in a sort of a clockwise direction? So can we just start this side and just see You're comfortable, yes, so we'll ask you to sum up at the end then. So Peter, anything?
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation, really good. Something that Emma said and linked to the geography and topography issues that you said, I mean, those stats are great, but I think absolutely agree, this needs to be a collaborative effort. I just wonder, right now, are there particular pockets of Wales where, for whatever reason, lack of volunteers, lack of cooperation and collaboration, you know, are there pockets of Wales that are of concern for you in terms of the weight, despite the great effort that you're doing? You know, did you have any particular concerns about any parts of the country?
Yeah, certainly. And do you mind? So we've kind of looked into what is our demand nationally in terms of providing a response. We did use a target time of 1 hour in that instance, so it's a little bit further on the 2-hour target. And we were able to basically assimilate how much additional response requirement you needed in every area to be able to provide a response between the hours of 8 to 8. This is very much in line with the National Community Falls Response Framework, which came from the Welsh Government's 6 goals. And ultimately, every area doesn't have enough resource to be able to fulfil the demand. There is collaborative work going on with health boards in terms of them stepping up responders. There's collaborative work, as you said, with the volunteer section. And I think some of the great work that's coming through the Falls desk will certainly entice volunteers to Falls again, because they'll be released quicker from scene. With some of the sort of anecdotal feedback around Falls is we can't get off scene quick enough. I'm a volunteer and I've got a day job. Please, can I get off the scene? If you go to a cardiac arrest, it's a very quick response. There's someone right behind you, you're leaving quite quickly. Back to your point, certainly we have demonstrated that to Welsh Government to say this is the kind of resourcing required to meet that demand within that 1 hour target. Admittedly, that's a little bit advanced from the 1 hour target. So any area you can think of, collectively, there are areas that are geographically really hard to cover in that response time. If you think of Betsy Cadwallader, for example, we have one commissioned resource trying to cover the whole of the north. And anyone who's been to the north knows from geographically, it's really hard to get to Conway and further on into the west.
Yeah.
So those patients are undoubtedly going to have a longer wait for that response time, as an example.
Thank you. Moving on, Brown. Second.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also to James and Ben for bringing the story to us today. I'd also like to put on record thanks to Judith really for sharing hers and her mum Ethel's story with us. It's so important that we continue to hear stories like this. We hear them frequently in Quest, and Liam said at the outset, unfortunately, this, as tragic as it is and as unacceptable as it is, it's not unusual, is it? We do hear stories very similar to this. I can see we've made some great improvements so far, and that's wonderful to see. There's clearly a lot more for us to do, isn't there, as well? And we discuss falls at Quest quite a lot. We also discuss the putting things right, the PTR, how we respond to complaints we had. And I have 2 questions, please, coming from the video I've seen. They're quite different questions. The first one is, it's great to see we have a falls desk that operates now from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But we know people fall between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. the next morning. So some thoughts around any potential possibilities to extend the service, because we're only covering it for, half of every 24-hour period. And my second question, as I said, is quite different. And one of the sentences that Judith shared with us in her story was, she said, after she wrote to us, we answered, but it felt to her as if it was swept away. So it's that response from ourselves to the circumstances that they experienced. And so my question, I suppose, is 2 parts. The first part is, what have we done to support Judith and Ethel since, given that they felt like that about our response? And secondly, I am aware of the work that has been ongoing with our PTR team. Some more about that, I think, in terms of a discussion at Trust Board today would be helpful, because not everybody here hears those conversations, they're not part of them. And it continues to be a real challenge for our PTR teams.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so well, I think we've talked an awful lot over all the time in other organisations previously. Getting our responses right is critical. We all know how important it is. And when people take the time to write to us and share their experience, really essential that our response reflects that and is empathetic and offers clarity. Sometimes we can't change anything, but we can offer clarity. I think what both the PTR team and the PECI team have done in this instance with Mrs. Parfitt is they did reach out. The fact that we've been able to do the work which has saw Mrs. Parfitt come, be filmed, share her experience with us, allow us to use that experience to inform conversations at board and at quality committee, but really more importantly to help inform the work that James, Ben and others are doing, thinking about where quality improvement, continuous improvement resides in falls for the whole of our organisation. And we know from these stories that we'll know over a long period of time, they are used within the health boards as well. So we don't just hold them for ourselves. We use them to support health boards to highlight the areas where we think we could do something differently as a system. So I hope that both, well, particularly Mrs. Parfitt, but I hope Mrs. Parfitt and her mother feel like we truly listened both to the experience and to the feedback experience, and we have responded. And certainly, I don't know if they're watching today, but I know that Leanne and the team will absolutely reach out on the back of today. The learning that is also in place, and this is changes that are coming through from April. So we have changes to the Putting Things Right regulations, which take place from the beginning of April, and we move to a new platform regulation, listening to people. And at the centre of that regulatory change has been a slightly more permissive environment for us to flex our responses and ensure that we're more personal in the responses. So there is absolutely a recognition that some of the content of the PTR letter, Putting Things Right response letter, has got quite a structure to it. What the listening to people regulations does is enable us to try and personalise that a bit more. I would probably also share on behalf of the team, at times we're dealing with a very high volume and the team aspire to personalise all of the time. But there are always times when we know we can do better as a team. So I'm not going to let the team in place. I think in this instance, we've learned really things that have been able to share the experience. And I hope the experience, both for what we're doing on falls and what we do with listening to people, will play through over the next period. And the second first of your questions, which was extension of service. I think this is interesting for me because what we have done is respond to a service demand. So you wouldn't normally expect an ambulance service to be thinking about caring for a patient on the floor for in excess of 12 hours on a regular basis. That is what we had to do. So what we needed to do was really think about what's the model of care, how do we adopt with efficiency and effectiveness, both the clinical evidence and also some of the supporting things that wrap around that evidence to offer something different. The support we had from our government was on a 12-hour basis. I think what we are seeing from the evidence so far is a real case for change. So we will need to work with commissioners. We need to work internally to think about how we might be able to do something differently. There's no new money. We all know that in the planning guidance. So it's about doing things differently. I would just add one piece to Peter's comment. There is a piece of work going on nationally around a director of services. And one of the things that is really empowering to the clinicians and the resource allocators sitting within the falls desk environment is if we have a really comprehensive director of services that got a range of options available to them. We know from all of the feedback, face-to-face and remote, we are better able to enable someone to stay at home where the director of services has the range of services that you would expect to keep from them. It's often not the clinician making the decision that makes that drives something here. It's not the clinician that is restricting a decision. It is actually what's available to them in that moment that is going to respond in a reasonable way, and what risk can they carry then to access those services.
Yeah, please, Chair. Thank you. I've got a couple of, I don't have questions, but I've just got a couple of points. I think first of all, I'm pleased that Welsh Government offered us the investment opportunity, and we had an ask, didn't we, mid last year, as to how investment could be utilised, and to offer some assurance to Judith and Ethel, our focus on falls in terms of that potential allocation is, I hope, demonstrates that we recognise that there was opportunity to do more. However, on that front, what I would say is that the allocation's been provided to us for 25-26 and 26-27. There is no allocation beyond 26-27. So, the board needs to be alert to the fact that the money is provided for a very short period of time. Just to add to your question and what Liam's shared on the hours of coverage, because the allocation was given to us so far into the year, this desk was stood up at significant pace. So my thanks to the team for doing that at pace. There's two flip sides to that. The first, of course, is that the hours of coverage were initially in relation to what we thought was affordable and what we thought we could create the capacity to staff. Given that we don't think we can spend the full in-year allocation, the team is going to be looking at extending the hours through things like overtime. So we need, hopefully our people will buy into that, but to at least test if there is merits on a case for extending the hours. However, that's not affordable in the allocation for next year. So we can spend the full allocation next year, but it is between the hours of 07 and 1900. So I just kind of wanted to be really honest and upfront about what the money, how far the money goes. But we're, of course, very grateful to have it and to try and demonstrate the opportunity. There was a figure in there about responding incidents increasing. I just kind of want to bring that back to, for me, the very obvious responding incidents are increased because the lost hours reduced. And that it is straightforward as that. We were able to get to more patients because the handovers improved during those times. It was, of course, very sad that at the time of Ethel's incident, which was January 25, 27,000 hours were lost in January 2025. So that just illustrated some of the constraints that we've had. Whilst it's good to see, it's equally unsurprising to see. And of course, if we have a deterioration in the lost hours, sadly, we will respond to less patients. There are and have been learning opportunities as we've gone here, and it's great that the team is alert to that because, again, it was stood up at pace. Utilisation is up, correct. The hours provided to us by our supplier are down. And so that's a problem, and we are actively engaging with our supplier to ensure that they fulfil the contractual asks that we have procured them against. But also in that, we do need to work with our supplier on ensuring that the resources are in the right place, and we need to be thinking about things like the distances that we are running some of those resources to get to patients, because that may also not be efficient. The other area that I'm glad we're beginning to find confidence here is in how we are utilising volunteers. For many reasons, we've had a degree of discomfort at the notion that a volunteer may leave a patient. And we have to find greater confidence in a volunteer attending to do what the volunteer can do within their scope and then leave. Because the reality of that is volunteers remaining on scene for hours and hours and hours because there may be a delay in the ambulance responding does not continue to keep them signed up to volunteering for us. So we have to find greater confidence, both clinically and operationally, in a volunteer attending to do what the volunteer can do, and then comfort in leaving, because then the volunteers will continue to go to more patients and stay with us. So I would urge us to do more in that regard, and particularly focusing CFRs with their additional analgesia. And I do think that we can do more there in terms of CFRs and return CFRs to go into what are lower acuity calls, because they'll recognise their time on scene would be contained, because that's what turns them off. There's opportunities in there for us to do more, to go further, to test, which is clearly very exciting. So hopefully we can keep that going. But well done,
Thanks. And just to emphasise that point, if you are a first responder, a volunteer, go to a call where, in this case, you might have sat there for 12 hours, all through the early hours of the night, when you think that she made the first call at 9 in the morning and the ambulance didn't arrive until 3 the following morning, 3 something or other. A responder could have turned up at 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. and still been there at 3 a.m. following day.
And thank you very much for that. And others have asked some of the questions that were running through my mind, so that's really handy. one of the things that I was really struck by when Judith was speaking was the impact of the experience on her mother's dignity. And she mentioned something which we don't talk about very much, but is true of all humans, that at the point at which you're waiting for hours and hours and hours, someone might need to go to the loo. And I wondered what we are able to do with a particular focus on dignity, because while I appreciate that it's not necessarily a huge factor in the ultimate clinical outcome, it is a huge factor in a person's experience. And possibly then long term on their confidence. So I wondered if you could just let us know how you support volunteers and staff to support patients to have a more dignified experience when they're going through a fall.
Yeah, that's a very poignant question. I think that's really rang true in the video, didn't it? For Judith, was very much around preserving dignity. Now, ultimately, if we can get there quicker, we can respond quicker, we preserve dignity if we're able to, in this instance, avoid that toileting need. But there's no guarantee, is there, that someone's not going to need the toilet in the next 10 minutes once they've called us, and we may still be taking some time. So I think there is awareness through our volunteers in terms of the CWR and things about how we can, the community welfare responders and our volunteer arm around how we can support personal care needs. But we're not trained domiciliary care, if you like. So it would be around pain relief would be one of those things. And I think in this example, there was a real struggle. I think the student was reporting a lot of pain, and potentially with less pain, the actual manoeuvring of Judith would have been easier and could have been supported by someone who was at scene with her. Although they wouldn't be trained in sort of manual handling to be able to use the toilet per se, would be able to, respect her in terms of her needs and let her daughter take a step back in that instance.
Yes, creating that little bit of distance sometimes from the personal relation involved can be quite helpful. Yeah.
Can I just add as well? I think what we found with the desk is having that clinical oversight, that very early clinical intervention, can really start to explore the opportunity about can we get up from the floor.
Yeah.
And it seems simple, doesn't it, to say to someone, please, if you can, get up from the floor. But actually our systems, our processes sometimes encourages the wrong behaviour, which is to remain on the floor. But we understand that, clinically we need to lead that. Clinically we need to own that. But it's not just us. There's a wider system out there. And I think, the work that Ben's doing nationally, working with partners across the health boards, we recognise there's lots of people in the health boards that can respond. But it's just about raising that awareness that actually there is a patient waiting here in the community. If you have got capacity, can you help? But it's what I see from an operational perspective is coordinating that centrally across the whole of Wales via a desk with the right specialist resources in place to then coordinate with the health board partners to get the right response.
And it certainly sounds like a major step forward. So yeah, thank you very much all for your work.
Thanks, Anna.
No,
Kerry.
Two of my questions have been covered actually by Ethan, but I did just want to share an observation really with my third sector hat on. And, going back 10 years ago when I was working in the charity sector, the number of charities working with older people that are working in that falls prevention, but also falls crisis area. And I know we work with some charities, but I'm just thinking about the link up with Public Health Wales on the wider perspective here, and the number of people that we come into contact with every day, regardless of falls. I think off the top of my head, 1 in 2 people that fall have uncorrected vision. So that stat might not be right, but it was really significant. So I think whilst we're really busy, and part of, a lot of what we're talking about today is because we are, so pressured within the system. But I think it's also helpful to think about it from that wider strategic objective. Okay, who else can we work with besides our traditional partners and charities we work with for a long time? And is there an opportunity for us to help prevent, somebody like Ethel having that awful experience again?
Yeah, I think this is part of the reason why I want to lead into and lean into with this organisation, the falls agenda. And this is part of my sense has been, I'm new into the system, but even looking at when we received the falls money, so when I got the happy letter saying, hey, here's some funding, the experience I see is that there's such disparate work, good work, which is I think what you're also outlining, that's not connected. So, St John's have got a great piece of work at the moment around training homes, individuals, families to pick people up when they fall. But when we got the money for the falls desk, we weren't told that this was also an offer that had been commissioned. So I think my lens is that there's a huge amount of work that isn't connected or joined up. And actually, the benefit for us, I think, in terms of working with our local authorities, voluntary sector, other blue lights such as fire, does require a little bit of let's gather as many people together as we can to see what's happening and then try to build out what good might look like. I suspect that if we all pull together how much we're spending in falls and frailty disparately, in local authorities, in health boards, with us, St John's, fire, we'd probably be quite surprised. And I think there might be a sense of maybe we could use that differently. So that's the piece of work I'm hoping in the new financial year we'll be able to start to contribute to. And I think we're in a really unique position as WAST, as a national provider, offering a lens, linking to the question Peter asked, what works, what doesn't, and actually really thinking about what we can do differently and the insights we can bring to the conversation. And we'll probably also learn about lots of other sectors, as you say, Kerry, that are doing stuff that we maybe don't even know about and we could be equally tapping into. So there's a real benefit for me about looking up and out.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Kerry. Just moving around the table, and Katie, Rachel.
Yeah, it was just, a thank you and an apology again, as you said, Emma, to Judith and to Ethel for that story. It was very, very emotional, and I suppose they share a lot of what people have said already. But the one perspective, I suppose, from my portfolio was just thinking about how we shine a light more regularly on this through our performance reporting. So we obviously know we're trying to move to a much more focus on outcomes. We've started to do that over the last year in terms of thinking about how quickly we respond to people with strokes and with STEMIs. Yeah. And actually the conversation we've been having as executives is the other fallers another category where actually we should be highlighting it either to board or certainly to Quest. Very much more regularly, so that we are assured that we're making improvements for the people like Ethel, as we should be. Thanks.
I agree with Rachel, and I think even if we think about it pragmatically as a board, and we think about demand management, we talked about demand management and what are the things that we can do differently. As you colleagues have said, fallers is our greatest disposition. So I kind of sit here and go, we need to do something about fallers then, don't we? Because actually, it's the thing that actually clogs up and creates a lot of demand for us. And if we could do things differently, we might be able to remove some of that demand, which then might mean better patient outcomes for other categorizations of calls and our populations.
Thanks, Emma. Just casting your mind, right? So wrap up.
I think almost everything you said. I just want to come back to the earlier point on fundamental care. We framed that question particularly around our staff and the volunteers, and I just want to kind of put a little bit of tribute to our colleagues who are working in these settings a minute on EAs and in other environments. I think our workforce, Ben, James and Ben, you kind of made a reference to where your education comes from in the fundamentals of care, and actually the adjustment that our people have had to make over the last few years. So our people now do offer a lot more care for extended periods that they never did before. You didn't become an EMT or a paramedic expecting to care for somebody for 12 and 16 and 24 hours. And so I just want to kind of put on the record really a note of thanks to all of our colleagues across the country who have really thought about their practice, thought about what they're doing, and thought about how they can expand what they are doing to meet the needs of the patients that are in front of them. And I think the bit that this service offers, and this is what I hope to come from the service in part, is that, you know, if we had this service in place at the time, maybe in the conversations that happened between Mrs. Parfitt and Mrs. Moss, we would have picked up quite quickly that it was more likely a fractured neck than anything else. And therefore, we would have been in a better place to prioritise it. So when we think about the linkage through to the ambulance performance program, we would have actually clinically been in a position to prioritise this call in a way we couldn't at that time. They were in a time stack based on a fall without that level of intelligence. So again, in our understanding of how we're prioritising care and holding care, way we talked about it with volunteers, way we talked about it in the oversight, I think that's us changing shape. But I just want to pay a particular attention to those fundamentals of care, how we're better supporting patients for longer through our ACAs, through our EMTs, EAPs, and through our paramedic workforce.
Thanks very much, Liam. So just to kind of wrap that up, first of all, a huge thanks to our colleagues, to Ben and James for coming in today, and a particular message to Judith in particular, just recognising that she feels that the response she got at the time was a bit sort of formulaic, perhaps a bit tick boxy, and just reflecting that this incident, this fall, happened over a year ago. And I hope anyway, that if Judith is watching this or watching at a later date, she will recognise that in that 12 months there's been a huge change. The Falls Desk has been created in those 12 months. We are dealing with these matters in a slightly, hopefully a better way, and providing better support. So I hope that gives her some comfort that things are moving in the right direction, reflecting that there's still some way to go, reflecting it's still only a 12-hour service, and all of those things that we've talked about this morning. But thanks to Judith and her mother and sharing the case with us. Thanks to colleagues for coming in today. And it's a process that we're going to look with a lot of interest. I share very much our Chief Exec Emma's vigour on this, because in my own personal case, I just think back to my mum who had Alzheimer's at 92. She fell at about 2 a.m. in the morning trying to get to the toilet in a care home, and that was the end really of a sort of very long hospital stay, which inevitably in death. So these are real things that happen to real people. There's a lot of suffering that go on. And the other comment I just make, if I may, is that we had from Hayley, we heard a few moments ago, a little while ago, about the reflection on Wait 45 and ambulance crews perhaps feeling to some extent a little bit reluctant just to hand patients over. But the other side of this issue around balancing two bad things is this, that for every ambulance crew that is reluctant to hand a patient over, there is someone like Ethel lying on the floor, perhaps for many, many hours in extreme pain and discomfort. So we need to try and get that on the show. But thank you very much indeed. So we'll say thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.
And wish you well, and very important task.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to item 8.1, which is the follow-up. I think Andrew, you're going to give us a bit of an update in the staff story from last month.
Yeah, happy to do that, Colin. Rachna continues to balance participating in the NHS graduate training programme with her academic colleagues, and of course actively contributing within Rachel's team as part of the strategy planning and performance team. Alongside that, she's been playing a key role in arranging a number of cultural events which will promote cultural diversity within WAST, and she is a key member of our BEAM network. But what I particularly wanted to bring to the attention of the board is that you will remember, I hope, that Rachna plays a key role in her local communities and a number of organisations. And I'm delighted to tell you that she's been nominated as Community Champion of the Year in the prestigious St David's Awards that are held here in Wales. So I'm sure on behalf of the board, I'd like to wish her all our well wishes and good luck for this really well-deserved external recognition.
Thanks very much. Okay, so if we're all content, we'll move on to the next item 9, which is very much linked to the conversation we just had. It's our fairly standard, although now a slightly revised format, paper concerned with avoiding harm, actions to mitigate avoidable harm. And just before I hand over to Liam, I just reflect as well, we talked about the personal care issue. I just very much reflecting on what Liam was just saying a moment ago. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that there were the dignity issues of people lying on the floor that we heard about, but ambulances are not the place to get to a toilet. And we have patients sitting on ambulances for many, many hours. So those same issues around dignity and personal care apply. And also, to Liam's point, this is not what paramedics and ambulance staff signed up for in expectations of what their working life would entail, sitting with perhaps elderly, frail, possibly physically confused patients and the like for many, many hours. It's a different type, a different role entirely from the one that they thought they were kind of signing up to. So with that, Liam, did you want to take us through the paper?
I will do, Chair. And I'll note that quite a lot of our conversation today has covered quite a lot of territory.
Yep,
indeed. I guess what I would like to do is just start by noting that Emma's had conversations with Andy and I, and is quite keen to see this avoidable harm paper evolve and to be a more informative paper for the board that goes not just into the handover delay harm, but also a broader picture of things that we do differently and better. So it's going to be an evolving report, and it sits alongside, and I think this is also important, it will sit alongside the work we're doing on the MIQPR for next year. So Rachel alluded to some of the measures that we're thinking that we might want to alter, where we know that there is the potential to reduce avoidable harm within our care, but also how that avoidable harm could be reduced across the pathway if we're measuring things carefully and effectively. So I think you'll see this report evolve again over the coming months. Specifically, I think what we will see drawn out in this report in greater detail is work related to ST elevated MI, so kind of particular types of heart attack, what we're doing around stroke and what we're doing around falls. So I think as we move through this, we will see that reporting become more explicit in here as areas of avoidable harm that are indicative of, are often exacerbated as a result of the delays that we have. And we know that communities and clinical colleagues in equal measure are very concerned that we get to them in any of those three areas in a timely way. I'd also note the report highlights us going live with some news reporting, so we're changing some of our clinical scoring. I think, again, that will be a really insightful exercise, particularly where we're holding patients for long periods of times. So news isn't something that we would, early warning scores for deterioration is not something that you would expect, again, to be doing it for 12 and 24 hours. It's something we should be doing for a short time, and it should be informing the prioritisation and handover care to hospital colleagues. But actually, again, being able to see that, look at the deterioration over a period in our care, it again gives us an insight into some of the avoidable opportunities that we have. Emma, in her report earlier, highlighted the number of lost hours that we have. We had over 13,000, which is still over double what we expect to have in the system in December. And what that equated to was 3,698 patients waiting over an hour in an ambulance and 1,175 over 12 hours. Again, I just refer back to the story that we've had and the conversation that we've had with Emma in that space. I think the final comment then, in terms of the framing of the report, and I'll take the report as read, is obviously we've gone live with phase 2 of the ambulance performance framework. That has changed a number of areas that we're measuring behind the scenes in terms of understanding what the impact is for orange and yellow calls in particular. And again, I would expect us to be drawing that out through this report. So the orange calls are the ones where we were looking, we'd really be wanting to push for now. That's those three areas that I talked about earlier with STEMI, stroke and falls, but also acknowledging, you can have deconditioning and deterioration in the yellows if we don't have appropriate clinical oversight and a response to patients in those areas as well. So that sets the scene for the report, how it is going to evolve over the coming months, how it relates to what we're doing in the ambulance performance framework, and the content of the report in large part we've covered through a lot of the dialogue we've had today.
Great, thanks, Liam. I agree with that. So going well, looking for any questions or comments. Well,
Thank you, Chair. You've answered some of my questions in your introduction, Liam, so thank you for that. And I appreciate that we'll have information in the future around the impact, hopefully positive impact from implementing phase 2 in December. anecdotally and informally, are we seeing any change this far? Is it achieving what we hoped it would in terms of reducing the number of events of avoidable harm?
So what I think we can say at the moment is that we are getting senior clinical oversight in earlier. We are prioritising differently, and so that is better for patients and their experience. We are learning about the prioritisation we put in place and whether we've got everything right first time. This was a pilot. There absolutely is some internal learning and things that we would want to have continuous improvement cycling around on. Over the last bit, in terms of our ability to say categorically, as a result of this change, we have got to more patients earlier. Can't make that direct correlation. What I can say is that we are more confident that we are getting to the right patients earlier with the available resource that we have. Because underneath all of this there is always a queue that is bigger than our available resource because of all the issues that we know. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bethan.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, maybe the point I'm going to make as well, maybe might colour that in a little bit too, because I was, of course, drawn to the table as to the graph. Some of this will dovetail with the MIQPR conversation, but we might as well do it now. Point 9 that shows the no sends and cancellations by patients, and you can see the still we have not needed to deploy can't send, so we continue to bring patients into our service despite the season, the winter pressures as well. Again, this year, that's now the second winter where we haven't used can't send or no send and brought patients in, knowing that that's bringing activity into our organisation to try and manage. But of course, what's interesting to see now, if you look at the table at the chart item 10, is you can see for the first month, December, that the consultant close has increased. And so, you know, it's the first month, it's now the highest month as a proportion of incidents being closed. It's the highest month for the volume of incidents closed. So it's positive on both counts. But what's reassuring for me is that it also looks like the best month for self-care and referral. So what it's kind of showing to me is that we're not bringing activity in to tell those patients do something for your, go yourself to the emergency department. So we're kind of trying to triangulate the effect and the outcome for patients. Equally, it's month 1, currently in month 2, and so your question welcomed is premature.
I was impatient.
I know, I understand. Yes, but it is that that teasing out the difference between model versus seasonal pressure. So I think you always knew going in that would present us some challenges. So I do think that as the system settles, as we emerge from winter, that's going to give us some early snapshots as to in terms of the effect. I think it's encouraging, but as Liam says, I don't think it's categorical. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask about the immediate release. So, when you read through today's papers, generally my sense is there is some good improvement in some areas, but there is some decline in others. So I was trying to understand the recent changes and what's the impact of that. So when I look at national reportable incidents, for instance, it seems a significant drop from last year. When I was looking at the immediate release numbers, it's quite hard because we're in a transition, aren't we, to understand the context of that. And I know I've asked a number of times around how that features in W45. So looking at this, the Amber 1 immediate release declined. Looks like in November it was 254 and in December was 14, but of course it's a different category. So just looking for a bit of assurance on that, please.
I think you need to read the other line down, don't you? Because the 182 was the ones for the now, which I assume are the orange now, aren't they?
Yeah.
So you need to sort of add, but it's still slightly better than a bit total, but because as you say, it's bit apples and pears.
Yeah, I can. I mean, that's the right spot, Chair. The reporting has just continued. The reporting continues, and the old amber one, of course, I don't want to say it's a direct replication to orange now, because it's not, because the old amber one is now RCS1 prior to clinical navigator, so we can't necessarily make those direct correlations. But the reporting, however, has continued on the basis of continuing to look at purple and red, old red, and then amber moving to orange. We are also still monitoring yellow and green as well, where those requests are made. So the reporting remains in place. Our sharing with Welsh Government and with the Chief Operating Officers remain in place.
So if we were looking, for example, at stroke patients, they would currently be falling into
No.
I would expect most of stroke to be in orange now.
Yeah. So that,
clinical review.
I guess then my secondary point is, it remains very high.
It remains too high.
Absolutely.
And the health boards where it is higher remains consistent.
Yeah.
And of course has a correlation to the lost hours.
All links together.
Yeah. And I guess, sorry to come back, but I guess then the context of that in W45 remains, a key priority, doesn't it? So is it still, I know, Liam, you attend those meetings, don't you? So is that discussed?
We've identified the 3 areas I've just talked about, stroke as being a key measure for understanding and seeing improvement in Wales as a result of having handover 45 work. So the clinical drivers that we're prioritising are STEMI, stroke and fracture necrophemia. They're the clinical areas where we're saying we want to see the outcomes improve materially as a result of the implementation of handover 45. And that's the driver. That has been a driver in the conversation with health board colleagues, with Andy and myself sitting there, with both government and with NHS performance and improvement.
Thank you. Yeah, and with health board colleagues, we recently produced a pack for them, which I'm going to request is in future papers, which gives them an idea of the sense of the harm that we think and the risk that's being held in the community, because that's a driver. I think the other things that we know that the handover situation needs to be better. We know there's a direct correlation with the fact that people wait. If we have got 15 or 20% of our ambulances undeployable because they're sitting outside an ED, but there are things that we need to attend to ourselves. So call to door time has significantly increased in terms of length. So is poorer in terms of performance for things like stroke and STEMI. So we're going to commission into the new financial year some continuous improvement and quality improvement programmes of work. Cardiff and Vale themselves are looking at things like their stroke pathways, and they're doing that through a QI lens. We're going to attach to that and actually look at it from start to end. And then we've got to think about conveyancing. So I think there are still some things within our gift that we need to attend to and think about, which would help to reduce harm, whilst also working with the system to get them to manage the bits that they're accountable for.
Very helpful, thanks.
Good. Any other hands up? Nothing on the screen. The only comments I would make is let's not lose sight of the fact that in the month in question, and Leah mentioned it, but just to shine a light again on it, over 1,000 patients spent more than 12 hours in the back of an ambulance. And that doesn't say anything about how many hours those 1,000 patients spent in their home or wherever the incident took place before the ambulance even arrived. So there is still a long way to go. And we reflect on that. The other thing I wonder, I know this is the paper which is going to evolve. I wonder whether this is the vehicle where we could actually learn a bit more about some of those pilots which are going on, which I always feel are really important, like the end of life pilot, the falls we've already heard about, mental health cars. Those kind of things that we're doing in different areas, they all have an impact potentially on reducing harm, because it gets care to a particular person quicker or in a different way, or in the case of end of life, allows people to stay in homes when they might otherwise be unnecessarily conveyed. And those kind of things can go under the radar. So this might be an opportunity to reflect on that. So if everyone's content with that, safety notes, which we duly do, and a good discussion, it's interesting how all of these conversations seem to be really connecting. And we're sort of connecting again to the last item before we take a coffee break, and that's over to you, Trish. Item number 10, risk management.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to focus a bit on our the risks we always talk about, and we've talked about them through the last few items. So 223 and 224, both risks have a consequence to patient safety and to patient experience. The first, just as a reminder for those that may be watching, is 223 is our inability to reach patients in the community, whereas 224 talks about access to definitive care being delayed. So both related to harm, but both slightly different. So you'll see that risk 223, which is our inability to reach patients in the community, has reduced. It's reduced for the first time for a number of years from 25 to 20. And I think, we've heard Emma talk about a shift from an average of 20% to 15% in December. We've heard, from the last story about we're responding to more incidents for falls, etc. So we can see that knock-on effect. And I think with 223, we can see more immediately the effect, which is why that has been able to reduce. Whereas 224, there is understandably somewhat of a delay or a lag before the feeling is that can reduce as well. And Lee and Liam will say a bit more about that as well. And these are high-rated risks, notwithstanding that 223 looks like it has an older date. They have all been reviewed. 223 remains at 20 for the moment, and Lee can talk about a more recent discussion on that and what might trigger something that changes that. But I think it's just important to sort of understand the nuances, because we lump 223 and 224 together, but they're quite different, which is why you see that change. And of course, we'll take a deeper dive on that in Quest next week, where we've got a bit more time. But we continue to remain focused on those internal transformations, but also that system-wide influence where we can. The other thing to draw out is risk 623, which is our data protection legislation. That's been reduced down to target. And I think a really good news story on the IG toolkit. It had been difficult the year before, but actually really good result on the IG toolkit, which has allowed us to reduce that. So that now sits at a directorate risk for the moment. Last thing I think is just the future of this report, Chair. I think that, at 18 months, 2 years ago, we brought the highest rated risks in because we wanted to make sure that we were paying due attention to them. We've got the actions to mitigate avoidable harm. We have all of the committees looking at their risks on a regular basis in some detail. All the risks drive the agenda. You have the AAAs here. So I think at ARAC in March, what we want to talk about is perhaps a different way we might bring risk through, whether that remains on the AAA and we see this register less frequently. But I think it can also evolve as this actions to mitigate avoidable harm paper evolves. We may do a bit of double running with the two highest risks for a little while, but I think we all consider that the work that the committees do actually is really detailed work on risk, and we're seeing that through that way. Of course, once we get to a stage of having a BAF, that must come here because that's our risk to our strategic objectives. And whilst these are linked to our strategic objectives, it is a different ballgame when we go into that BAF. So we'll talk that through, I think, at ARAC in March to see how we can make sure you're still getting the assurance that you need. That's it for me, Chair.
Okay, good. Peter, do you want to add anything in terms of, the thinking that ARAC went through for the reduction of these? Particularly the reduced.
They haven't seen it. They haven't seen it as yet. They haven't seen it. This is the first forum.
Okay, all right. Anything you want to?
I'll colour that in for you, Chair. So we were obviously pleased as a senior ops team to be able to reduce the score for the risk 223. Our approach to that was to ensure that we certainly didn't knee-jerk to just a couple of months. It was important to us to wait for what we could hold out as a sustained improvement. We know through the summer months coming towards winter, we certainly saw that in a majority of health boards. So it's not universal, but what we did was an assessment of each health board and then considered the likelihood of harm directly attributed to the risk as a nation. So it's a national risk. But we were content as a team that we had seen sustained improvement in enough health boards to reduce the risk on a national basis. Of course, we edged into November where we saw a signal of deterioration. December, however, coming in improved on November, so good. January will not. But again, our approach will be the same. We would look for a sustained position. So if we see February and March continuing on a deterioration, then we would, of course, be contemplating whether the risk should re-escalate. So we're not knee-jerking, looking for sustained. We were quite happy that we had seen sustained improvement to reduce the likelihood score. Of course, only by one. There's further to go.
But it's a direction of travel. Okay.
Much the same discussions are taking place. I think that the criticality is that within the level of vision we have at the moment, we are seeing so getting to a position where you're able to kind of explicitly state, well, I'm going to reduce the risk of harm, when actually I've got too many cases in front of me where we know harm and catastrophic harm has occurred. That doesn't work. But I think we are looking at the risk in the same way that operation colleagues are, just to give a bit of thought to, can we segment it differently? So actually, if we see that sustained improvement coming through in parts of the country where that is reducing the level of serious or catastrophic harm, then we might want to segment the risk differently on that basis. So we're in the same place. It's just the if you like, the outcome measure is slightly different.
The numbers are supposed to be sort of managed in real time, aren't they? So putting it down and putting it up, dynamic. That's exactly the word I was struggling for. Thank you very much. You found it for me, floating there in the ether somewhere. Yeah, they're dynamic things. So you and it demonstrates that. Okay.
Thanks. I'm just reflecting on how far we've come, I think, on this risk management. So I think well done to Trish and the team for that. As Trish mentioned, we do look at risk in committee. I think we could always do a bit more, but it's a packed agenda. So, I think my reflection is perhaps we could spend a bit more time on it. But I think absolutely we need to keep risk on the agenda at trust board level. If nothing else, it's around getting different perspectives and spotting and scrutinising if we are particularly changing those scores. Is that resonating with the wider board level as well? Whilst in committee, we might be down in a bit more in the weeds. So I would very much welcome that sort of continuous scrutiny at board level too.
Agree with that. Okay. No other comments. I think it's the noting you do. So let us then take our coffee break. It's just gone past. So if we give ourselves 20 minutes, so we'll meet again as we plan to at 10 to 12. reconvene, please, for the second half. Thanks for coming back so promptly. We're moving to item number 11, the MIQPR. I think it's straight to you, Rachel.
It is. Thank you very much, Chair. So as normal, obviously we take it as read, but just a couple of things to pull out. Firstly, the review of this MIQPR is ongoing. We've had a good discussion at board development, and we're going to have a further discussion at our next board development in February to see where we've got to. As a result of those discussions, we've made some changes in this first month. So for FPC, as we agreed, they received the kind of dashboards, but then only the graphs that were related to that committee. And also where something is green, there's no narrative particularly, just the graph. So I think that slims down the papers, but also kind of focuses the attention for the committees, and we'll be doing the same thing for Quest and for People and Culture. So that's really positive. You might have spotted in here, I don't know, it's only very limited at the moment, but we do have 2 SPC charts. So we've kind of made a start on having a look at how we might introduce those. So we've got one on the volumes of 111 calls that we answer, and one on the number of conveyances to EDs, both of which actually show that despite ups and downs, that's all part of normal variation. There's not a significant change in either of those two, but there's much more to do in terms of expanding the use of SPC charts to help us to see where we've got trends and changes. So just in terms of things to pull out, we've spent quite a bit of time already through a couple of items today talking about the EMS service. So just to pull out, and you will see that from our 111 service, there are a couple of metrics there that from a patient experience perspective are not great. So one is our call abandonment rate at 21.8% in December, and the other is the timeliness of the clinical ringback, not for the highest priority call, which continues to be very good, but certainly for lower priority calls, the ringback times are not within the timescales that we would want. And we know, whilst that might not, we don't know yet what the harm might be occurring in those levels, and we suspect people will probably be taking their care perhaps elsewhere. But you will see from a 111 perspective, December was a very high demand month, so that is definitely a factor. And increasingly, as we are using the 111 and 999 clinicians as more of a kind of cohesive team, the priority will be on some of the 999 calls, and so there is a certain amount of capacity that is taken up in those higher acuity calls. But we have started a conversation with commissioners, because actually our 111 service, when we did our last demand and capacity analysis, shows that it is, we cannot achieve those percentage targets that we previously looked at, the 5% abandonment being a particular one, because we don't have the commission numbers of staff. So we've started a conversation about how do we monitor and measure that service, what do they want to commission, what are their priorities, and we had an interesting conversation earlier this week at the JCC meeting about the potential for digital in the future being a channel that could, if commissioned correctly, be something that makes quite a difference in that space. So work in progress definitely with commissioners on the 111 side. The other one I just wanted to pull out was NEPTs. So again, at the JCC meeting earlier this week, we had a real sense that commissioners and health boards were quite interested and keen to do something different in the NEPT space. You'll see, 2 examples of metrics there. One is we had 13% of journeys cancelled on the day, and that's because health boards, we don't get to hear about outpatient cancellations, so we turn up not expecting to find a patient, and they haven't got an appointment. And on the other angle, we know that there was over 2,000 patients in December who we were unable to book a transport for despite them being eligible, because we didn't have sufficient capacity. Now that is something that is increasingly, as we know, and we've talked about it here, that is generating a lot of complaints and interest from politicians, quite rightly.